You know, maybe I should shoot this entire video ultra wide since it is a pretty wide lens. Nah. Hey everyone, so in this video we're going to review the GF 20 to 35mm f4 lens. Fujifilm was really awesome enough to send me this lens for about 2 weeks right before it was released, and I have all of my final files to review with you guys. I'm going to break this video into about 3 different categories of photos. We're going to take a look, and we're going to look for things like distortion, sharpness, flaring, and all of those sorts of things. We're also going to talk about HDR and long exposure photography, as well as how I shoot and ND filters and all that type of stuff. I also only had the lens for 2 weeks, like I mentioned. So this intro is actually being shot on the XF 8 to 16mm lens, which is actually a little bit wider than the GF 20-35. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please hit that subscribe button so you can follow along and see all of my latest videos coming out. And with that being said, let's jump into the specs. So I just switched the recording camera to the GFX 100S with the 50mm 3.5, if you were curious. So this is the spec section. If you already know the specs, feel free to skip ahead. But just to jump into it, this zoom is a 20 to 35mm lens on the medium format sensor. In a 35mm equivalent, it is a 16 to 28mm lens. So 16mm on the wide end is not super wide by any stretch. It's not an ultra wide lens. However, one awesome thing about it is it accepts standard lens filters. So it has a screw-on 82mm thread, and you can adapt any lens filter you want, opposed to the 8 to 16 on the XF, which has a built-in lens hood and a bubble, as you can see, a bubble front, not sure what you call it, but this does not accept ND filters. You need to get a big filter attachment and use like a 150mm square filter. So that is one thing that's pretty cool about this lens. In terms of aperture, the max aperture is an f4 and the minimum aperture is an f22. The minimum focal distance is 13.8 inches or 35 centimeters, which is a pretty small minimum focal distance, so that's cool. It's also a pretty light lens, weighing in at about 725 grams or 1.59 pounds. Again, like I mentioned, the filter thread is 82mm, and the MSRP of this lens is $24.99, which is not too bad. We're not going to make this a comparison video with the GF 23mm lens, but that lens is a heavy lens. It is 843 grams or 1.86 pounds, which doesn't seem like a lot heavier, but the first time I picked up this new zoom lens, my first thought was it's a pretty light lens. And the GF 23mm lens is an extra $100 on the MSRP, coming in at $25.99. And jumping into a few size comparisons, we can see this is a pretty big lens. The 110 is definitely a big lens, a bigger lens on the GF system, and the 20 to 35 is pretty close in height to that lens. Next to the GF Pancake lens, obviously it looks like a very big lens. The Pancake is also a pretty big pancake. It's a thick boy. It's pretty limited in lenses when I was doing this comparison, but now let's jump into some photos. So first we're going to dive into the building segment. We're going to be looking at all these photos in Lightroom to diverge a bit from my usual format, and that is because we're dealing with a zoom lens, so I want to be able to show you the settings pretty quickly. So basically we have these 3 lines at the top, the camera, and of course which millimeter we're at. We have the settings below that, and then the note whether or not we used an ND filter, and if we did, what type of ND filter. So as you'll see, this one's blank, so therefore no ND. I'm not gonna talk about ND filters for all these photos, of course, but just for your reference, that's the setup we're at right now. And we'll talk more about ND filters. I'm gonna have a segment in this video a bit later on. So I'm gonna kind of bounce between the RAWs here and there, but also one last note, for some of these, they're HDR and/or HDR panos. So take the settings pretty lightly when they're HDR, because basically the way you do an HDR merge is you have 3 or 4 plus photos, merge them, and it creates one new file. But the new file is not necessarily the longest exposure. So take it with a grain of salt, at least for the shutter speed. We're not gonna hardcore go into what made up each HDR photo. Maybe we'll do it for one, I'm not sure. Let's jump into it. This first photo was taken at the Lottie Hotel, Shout out to my pal Oliver for hooking me up with the view. And this is what we're looking at. So this was a 3-panel shot, HDR panel. And as you can see here, the merge was very successful. The distortion is pretty minimal, even though we're at 20 millimeters. This photo, actually, I did have one caveat. When you shoot at 20 millimeters and you want to do a pano, make sure you use very small increments. If you're doing panos with the 110 or the 45, other lenses that don't have a ton of distortion, you should be fine taking bigger leaps. Actually, this photo, the base of this photo is from Oliver. We used my camera to do it, but he took these series of shots. I did it as well, but I took too big of a leap and I could not get these to merge, at least in Lightroom. So that's definitely one caveat. If you're a panel person, I salute you, but also just make sure you take smaller jumps when shooting at 20 millimeters. But as you can see, we do have some extremeness going on with the merge. However, nothing, we cropped in and nothing is really sacrificed in the crop. So that worked well. This is, of course, the final edit, and I just filled in a bit of the sky in Lightroom. If we just zoom on in here, just quickly for science. Super sharp, and the detail is pretty insane. So next, we're in this alley. This is definitely the next two are pretty good examples of the distortion that I found with this lens. By no means is this lens perfect. I think it has an acceptable amount of distortion, maybe a little bit more than I would like. But if we look at the raw here, you'll see that I did clean up some of this garbage in the front. And this is also an HDR panel, which takes a bit to load sometimes. I did clean up some of that, but as you'll see, in doing this correction, we ended up with these white triangles at the bottom. And if you watched my initial pixel peeping video on this lens, you'll remember I talked a lot about these white triangles. So this, of course, was the correction. If I go turn the correction off, not a bad image. I think this is fine, but you know, sometimes you want a corrected image. You want it to look more like a tilt shift, like a more natural point of view and less distortion. So as you can see in this image, I did Photoshop in the missing pieces. This part was quite a pain. I don't want to look too close there, but I did a pretty clean job. But yeah, this is an example. Sometimes, you know, I did a lot of guided and auto correction. Like auto here, I felt didn't really do it justice. Guided definitely was a bit better. That's where we're at with this image. Basically, this was on a walk to shooting Pier 26, and on the way to the subway, we found the Ghostbusters location, which is a really impromptu find and a really exciting find. So same sort of thing going on. If we go into raw, as you'll see, we have these massive triangles, and if we go to crop, you'll see that, you know, there just quite simply is no saving a lot of this building. I chose to crop out most of it. I did Photoshop a bit, but you know, there's really only so much you can do. Depends how much time you want to spend, but just one of those things. And again, here, I did a full correction. I didn't do it manually with guided, and off, as you can see, is pretty low to the ground. So again, this isn't a bad shot. Clearly it was a bit crooked, but this is leveled. I love this shot. It's great. I just wanted to go for a bit of a corrected position, a corrected photo. So that's kind of an issue you'll face with this lens. Here we have Radio Cities. I started playing around with, so all we did was level this, and the level really didn't even see. This is the HDR panel, so doing a bit slow. All I did was level this, correct this out, and again, this is a panel. But if I go to view the crop, you do lose a lot of the image. It would have been really cool if I could have cropped it like this and get a bit more of the sides, but I would have had to have taken a wider, more photos to achieve that in the panel. So just an example where I didn't really correct this at all. I like the distortion. I played with this for quite a bit of time to try to correct it. You know, if you hit auto or vertical, you know, it clearly doesn't do it. So you'd have to do a guided correction. Also, obviously, I know I'm in Lightroom. Some of you people are really good at using proper programs to do panos and all of that. I didn't get that far yet, but this is my experience in doing with Lightroom. But overall, this is a very distorted look, but I kind of really like this look. I like this shot very, very much. Also, as you can see here, we have a decent amount of flare going on. So I'm not sure what was above here. Probably some sort of, it's probably street light. But we have a pretty decent amount of flaring here. I did not use the lens hood. So maybe the lens hood would have prevented that, but also I'm not sure how much it would have. So as you can see over here, this was further back. Decent amount of flaring between it. This lens it's not afraid to flare. Nothing that I was, you know, that I'm super disappointed with, but it will flare. Segmenting into the next image, you definitely see a ton of flaring here. Not bad. I kind of like the effect. This is another HDR. This is just a single shot. I actually had a lot of trouble trying to straighten this image. So much so that I kind of just gave up. I'm not 100% sure. I ran into this a decent amount with this lens. I would spend time trying to correct things. You don't know what you're seeing. Is it straight? Is it not? Nah, you look at it too much. It's hard to tell. But if we basically turn it off, you could see it's slightly tilted, slightly uneven. Although I do level things out, so I'm not sure how it ends up like that. But yeah. Either way, this image corrects fine. If we go into crop it, you could see that again. This is just a single shot, not a pano, so we're not really losing too much of the image. I just had a hard time straightening this image out. This, just a single HDR shot straight up at a building by Bryant Park. And yeah, overall, I think, you know, it's a cool shot. Shot at 20 millimeters, pretty, you know, open wide and not really too distorted. Not sure why these labels aren't coming up. This was a 5-shot, Kolari 5-shot. This was also a 5-stop as well. This I had a bit, I actually went and reshot this a bunch of times. So straight on is not too bad. This is just a single HDR photo. I did initially, when I first came here, I tried to take an angled shot like this and do a pano, and I ran into the issue of it not merging. I'm not gonna open that up. This is a pano as well. I think it's only a 2-shot pano. Yeah, overall, I mean, you know, you do have some distortion. This at the top of this photo is pretty, you know, it looks like it's a little stretch/extreme, but I think in a shot like this, it really adds to the character of the photo. And here we have a street shot wide open at 20. And, you know, I think this is a really solid shot. I think minimal distortion. You could probably correct this a bit more if you wanted to, but I believe I just did auto. This is the original, so it's really just kind of straightening it out more or less, not really doing a massive amount of correction to it. Hey you, yes you, watching the video. Thank you for making this far in the video, but are you subscribed? If you're not, what are you waiting for? Hit that button. So next, we're jumping into some miscellaneous shots, mostly street stuff. But yeah, this is going to be a combination of street photography as well as some long exposure HDR and all of that. So this was taken right outside the Citizen M Hotel. And if we just go into 100%, this is not an HDR, it's just a single shot. Pretty sharp. As we get pretty sharp edge to edge. I mean, this is like a little soft, but you'd be splitting hairs at that point. As we can see, wide open at 20, very sharp. And the distortion here is very minimal. Like most wide lenses, the key is to really get the perspective down when you're shooting, because if you don't, you may not be able to correct it in post. So up next, we have an HDR photo. This is just a single shot, and I shot it using a 5-stop Kolari filter. So again, let's wide open at 20. So let's just click into zoom and super sharp up here. Let's just do a sweep, sharp, sharp, sharp. Get a little bit softer towards the bottom, and this beam, of course, in the foreground is not in focus at all, but this whole building is just super sharp. And I think I mentioned this in my initial review when we were reviewing this, that unedited. I would really like a crop of just the building. I think it's a really interesting building to shoot. But again, wide open at 20 and very sharp all around pretty much, except this foreground beam. Another 5-stop ND filter, shot wide open at 20. So here, obviously, you see we do have an extreme perspective. This was not shot, you know, straight on. It was meant to be a bit of an extreme. If we take a look at the original RAW, all I really did was level this out. I did play around trying to get the perspective right, how I wanted it. The auto, I liked this auto. I liked this perspective a lot, but I didn't really want to crop in that much. I could probably fake most of this background, maybe like this, but you know, this is not really a great crop to use. You know, 4:5 is what you can use on Instagram for portrait. And I think, you know, it's not bad like that, but I just really wanted to see the top ends of the image. So I left the perspective as it is so that we can do 4:5 and lose very little. So that's kind of different choices you're gonna have to make when editing final files. This lens, shot wide open at 20. This perspective was taken on an extreme angle, so therefore you're gonna have to make some choices in post. Here's another shot, wide open, although of the Apple Store again. And this shot is almost would not guess that this was shot in a super wide lens. Not very distorted. If we click on the RAW, I didn't really modify too much here. I made no correctional issues, just did a bit of the aspect. So not too bad, pretty happy with this. This was an HDR shot, and the reason I shot it in HDR was so I could have all these highlights preserved. This shot too is also preserved. If I go back here, you could see that I could bring this all the way down, and we have all the detail on this Apple logo. It just becomes, HDR photography is a bit tricky because you can either go extreme HDR look, which in my opinion is a bit too much, or you kind of have to find a happy middle ground. This I thought was such a cool sign, so I stopped to take a picture of this. Again, another HDR shot with the Kolari 5-stop, shot wide open at 20. This is definitely, you know, you have a lot of distortion on this shot. If we open up the RAW and I click auto, you know, that it does not, it looked like it just tilted it. It didn't really do a ton. If we go to full, it full fixes it, but then I think we kind of kill the character of the shot. So also, if you correct it to full, I'm not sure why this is being weird. If you correct this to full, you can only fill in so much of this background here. You know, the ground is pretty easy, but over here we have a trash can or a fire hydrant. Makes it you can't really, you know, fill it in that much. So it's pretty limited. And then you just lose a bunch of the image, and this is still needs correction. So again, I think when you're using this lens at 20 millimeters, you really have to think about, you know, what type of look you want to get. And if you want a distorted look, a really wide lens look, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't, you better have some room to back up and shoot at 35. So here's a shot just in the subway. I did actually have this on a tripod, I believe. You know, just a straight on shot at 35, you know, no distortion, super nice shot. This I shot at, this was long exposure. This was a bit of a merge, I believe, a 2-photo merge. So I had, I took a long exposure of just without the train so that I can get the Canal Street sign. And then I did another shot just when the train went by. I believe that was at 50 seconds. So this is like a two Photoshop merge, but shot wide open at 20. And this is a great example of how, perspective can greatly, how a wide look and distortion can greatly enhance an image. So if we take a look at, this was one, and then this was the other. So just a single shot. So again, you can just quite simply crop in very easily. You don't lose too much of the image. Let's keep moving. This shot, shot close to Times Square, unfortunately. I know, not much to talk about here. This was shot also wide open. I cropped in a decent amount here, and I will just show you that pretty quick. I guess not too bad. Kind of a heavy crop. I was able to fill in. So in centering this, I avoided this square over here, but I had to fill in this square over there. So again, if you want a proper corrected image, a lot of this door is fake. It does take a bit of Photoshop know-how to fix it. Next image, obviously this is slightly unlevel, and I like that look, especially with this the squares and these lines that you get on this divider. And of course, all the lines up here. I think it looks pretty cool. This is an HDR merge with my Kolari 5-stop. Not too much to report here. This is wide open at 20, and I think it's a really cool look. You could crop in a little bit. Definitely makes it a bit more immersive. Nice thing about the GFX, you could basically, crop in on a portrait image, and of course, now you have a landscape image, and you have the pixels to pull it off. This I thought was super cool. Subway shot. I was pretty impressed how I nailed the perspective here, but shot at 20 millimeters and pretty much no distortion. I shot this as an HDR photo, so everything looks pretty hyper real, and you have all the highlights on this on this light. This is just a street shot at 20. Pretty heavy crop, I believe. Not too much to distort, but cropped into the center. You're really not looking at too much distortion. This was a long exposure, 60-second, shot at 20 millimeters, but not too bad on the distortion at all. I like the leading lines you get here from the railing and this structure at the top. Just a street shot, 1/400th of a second, wide open at 20. I think I did crop a little bit here, but I love this. This is where the lens will shine when you have some nice leading lines like this, and nice overhead as well as the ground. And then I did a crop at 35. So same scene. I'm pretty sure I was in pretty much the same exact spot, but yeah, pretty nice. You get two drastically different perspectives based on what you shoot and what millimeter you're at. Pretty close to the same area. This was actually no, this wasn't too bad of a crop, but again, shot at 35. Really love the perspective you get from the top and the road at the bottom, leading you to the focal point here. This was a cool shot, and I think, like I mentioned in my other video, if you saw it, when the GFX is rumored, it's rumored they're coming out with 150 megapixel GFX. If they did, we'd be able to read what this guy is reading on his phone. That would be pretty cool. But I thought this is a fun shot. This is a shot at 35, and of course, this is a pretty heavy crop, but fun shot. Shot wide open at 20. I did do a decent amount of perspective fix on this image. I'll pull up the raw. So if I pull up the crop, not too bad actually. I thought it was worse. We have these triangles at the bottom, and this is a guided. If we turn it off, of course, shot low, you have a perspective, but I guess this is a pretty good example of how you can fix the perspective even though it's shot at 20. This looks like a pretty non-distorted lens. This shot, I took a really cool shot of this carousel at night, Jane's carousel, and I wanted to replicate it in the day, but it didn't turn out as cool as I thought it would. This is a pretty heavy edit, but yeah. So this is at Bryant Park. This was an example of, I'll pull up the raw real quick. I just set this to auto. it just does a bit of, you know, rotational fix. But this is an example of an image where I wanted to correct this, but I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. And I don't think with this image you could really do a ton of correction. So it is what it is. This is missing the caption for whatever reason, but I believe this was a Kolari 5-stop, for those of you who were wondering. But yeah, I like this image. I kind of wanted to fix this correction a little bit so it wasn't too extreme, but I pulled around with it for quite some time. I picked it up, put it down over the course of a month, and this was really what I ended up with, just staying true to the original photo. So this look I don't mind, but again, just something to note when you're shooting wide open at 20, which I would assume a lot of you will if you have this lens, because if you want to shoot at the 35, there are some lenses that you should be able to get that are similar in focal range. So next we just have a street shot at 35. I believe, I'm not sure if this was a crop at all, but I really love the shot, despite the fact that, you know, it was not shot wide open or anything. I really love how you kind of like, you know, this shot is clearly taken on the inside of this little street cart, because you basically have the layer of signs at the top and then you get close to order and you're kind of on the inside of it. I think this is a pretty cool perspective, and obviously pretty much no distortion here, shot at 35. Next, we have another street cart, and this is a HDR photo, single shot. We zoom in, we have pretty much all the highlights preserved, and hot dog on the truck. And yeah, this is a good example of a HDR shot that I actually didn't shoot wide open. So there is that. And we have another food truck shot. This was shot at 20 millimeters, right at the corner of Bryant Park. Yeah, this is a neat shot for a couple different reasons. I love that we have one summit right here, and also we have the reflection of the Empire State Building, red, white, and blue. That's pretty cool. Of course, we've got the subway right here. We have a lot of ghosting of people, but it was at night and there just was a lot of people walking around. But this, I did crop in a little bit here on this image, but ultimately, or just a little bit to cut out some people. I'm pretty happy with the shot. I think the distortion is pretty non-existent. So since most of the photos we're reviewing in this video are HDR/long exposure, I wanted to make a quick segment and talk about filters. So for those of you who are unaware or kind of not as familiar, ND filters, they basically block light. So they have a wider range of steps that you can get, and what they allow you to do, specifically in terms of HDR long exposure, or even just shooting on a really bright day, is control the aperture and the shutter speed based on the type of shot you want to get. You could potentially avoid using an ND filter by just cranking the aperture up to, you know, close to as high as it goes on your lens, 32, 22, whatever it may be. But then you're going to degrade the quality of your image and you're going to hit diffraction. It's really important to use ND filters when you want to have a long exposure shot. Aside from ND filters, filters in general, like UV filters or just clear glass filters, are really important for lens protection. Quick side note, I used to bike to work a lot more frequently, and basically one day while I was biking, unfortunately someone dumped a massive amount of oil in the bike lane and I went down. I was fine. I did have my camera in my bag and my 5140, and fortunately I had a lens filter on that lens, because this is what happened to the filter. As you can see, the point of impact right here. So it's really important in general. I know we're going to mostly talk about ND filters, but filters in general, you definitely buy a new lens, you want to already used, whatever, you want to slap a clear filter on it, because if you don't, things can happen, and lens repairs can be super expensive. Even if it's something simple like calibrating a lens, you know, it's going to cost you a couple $100. So imagine broken glass. And if you have a Sony, good luck, because if you need to send your lens in, it's basically going to cost you more than the lens. So anyway, Kolari, they are a pro level filter optics company. They were really awesome enough to send me a bunch of filters that I used during my road trip, and of course while I was testing out this wide lens. So I want to just make a quick segment, introduce you guys to them, because They are a fantastic company. They make really quality filters, and they are kind of up and coming, unknown in this common photography filter space. So let's get into it real quick. This description from them, they are a pro level filter optics company. And after they spent time building the best infrared products, they wanted to branch out into average, normal photography filters, and of course, apply the same level of excellence into those. Their mission is to continue innovating in all areas of photography, pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And they sent me a bunch of filters. I'm going to show you an unboxing, but they come in this really nice case, and with foam in it and whatnot. And that's what their filters look like, if you can see. Like, I have just a quick example, quick comparison. Like, this is what B&W sends you. This is what these you can press in. This is a solid case. You can actually put this in your bag, and your bag could get knocked around, and you're good to go. So we're going to briefly talk about 3 types of filters: UV, IR, ND, and CPL filters. And first, we're going to talk about quality. As you've seen from all the photos that we looked at so far, pixel peeping a bit, and of course just final edits, the quality is top notch. I've never heard of Kolari. I did reach out to them before my trip, inquiring about, I wanted to get that aerochrome look, and that led me into testing out some of their normal filters. I may have video in the future where we take a look, where they send me a converted camera for infrared, but that's something we'll get into hopefully early next year, something like that. But yeah, besides Kolari, I obviously have extensive experience using B&W filters. They're of course top notch. They're known as one of the best companies that make filters. So it's not like I started out using lower tier brands. I'm very familiar with the quality you could expect from top notch filters. And Kolari, by no means, is any dip. They're exactly as you would expect, top-notch brand. And that brings us into the price. Kolari, their filters are priced exceptionally well. I'll pull up a screenshot here, just comparing, and we're not going to do like a crazy price comparison of all the filters and all that. You guys can look that up. But as a quick example, this B&W filter, it is a 10 stop. It comes in at about 180. Kolari's 10 stop, it comes in at about 160. Quite a big difference in price, and for all you get in the filters with the packaging, a big difference. We're going to get into that right now. For those of you that don't know, I co-run a design company called Untitled Era, so I have a pretty extensive background in design, and this is some premium packaging, if I do say so myself. The outer sleeve slides off, and then we have a black box with a nice glossy black logo on the top. Then if we open it up, we can take the filter case out, and then there is also a microfiber cloth in every pack, which is pretty cool. So this is a very sturdy case. I would definitely be really comfortable using this case, putting it in my bag, putting even in a travel bag. I could definitely get banged around a bit. It's very hard shell. Then on the inside, you also have a foam inlay holding the filter in place. The filter just basically pops right out, and taking a look at the filter itself, it looks really solid. There's super clear labeling, so there's no guessing which filter is which. I've had several other premium filters where the labeling is actually not done exceptionally well. Seems like a very basic thing, but that's where we're at. So this is the circular polarizer. The build is slightly different than the ND as well as the UV. UV and the ND share the same exact build quality. The circular polarizer, of course, needs to turn, and it features a very similar grippy pattern on the outer rim. Super easy to use, so no issues there. And last but not least, we have the microfiber cloth, which is super premium. I've used this extensively. Nothing really to report, it just works really well. And of course, it has their logo on it, which is also just really nice touch. So just to touch on the specs super briefly, I will get more into the specs in depth in another video. In terms of the IR ND filters, they are IR ND filters, and that's because they are infrared ND filters. If you are like me, you go out, you shoot long exposure, HDR, all of that, or you just simply need an ND filter for a bright day and you want to use a low aperture, or a large aperture rather, you know, these ND filters will work great for you. But also they will work well if you are using them for infrared or astrophotography as well, as they support up to a higher spectrum of light. I will link some information below so you can read all about that. But in short, it's kind of like a dual use ND filter, which is pretty sick. Kolari has also engineered these filters to be super color neutral, so you won't have any issues with odd colors and anything like that. I think one of the most important things to mention is the material that they're made out of. They are made out of Corning Gorilla Glass, and it is a hyper strong, hyper scratch resistant. The industry standard is Scope B270 glass, and compared to that, these are much stronger, much more scratch resistant. The Kolari filters also have a premium coating, which makes them less dust resistant, as well as oil and smudge. I can attest to this. I did actually notice a difference here. In going on that road trip for a week straight, which was full traveling, full shooting, I did notice that these lens filters, I had all UV cut filters on the entire time. They were really stayed pretty clean. I didn't have to clean them that often. And it's not usually the case, because when you're traveling, you know, you're out of your element, you may end up touching the lens here and there, or just dust and whatnot. They stay pretty clean, I gotta admit that. And again, just to mention, these are engineered to be a super neutral filter, so the color looks really awesome, really great, no oddities at all whatsoever. In terms of their UV filters, the build quality is the exact same as the IRNDs, same glass, same outer rim, and all of that. They offer two kinds. The one is just a pretty much normal UV filter. The other is a bit more of a pro version for astrophotographers. And in short, that version provides more support for H-alpha and sulfur 2 transmission. In terms of the CPL, like we discussed in the unboxing segment, the build is slightly different, as it is a more, you know, it's a different function. However, super grippy, same sort of quality that you can expect from the IR-ND and the UV cut. It's a pretty low profile filter and has a anti-reflective coating on it that basically increases light transmission and reduces flares and ghosting, while also being dust resistant. Lastly, they boast a lifetime warranty, which in my personal interaction with them, I fully believe that they will be awesome to work with in that if something does happen. And in terms of the ND filters, just because that was the main focus in bringing this segment up, they offer a wide variety. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, a 10 stop, a 15 stop, and a 20 stop. So again, I will link to some information with them below. I did sign up for an affiliate code, so if you want to check out their filters and you would love to support this channel, feel free to use that link. Just to be transparent, they sent me these filters to test out. I did get to keep them, but I am not being paid or promised to give a good review. I'm giving an honest opinion. I would never push a product or recommend a product that I did not either use myself or really enjoy. That's Kolari in a nutshell. Here is the last segment we're going to talk about. This is the waterfront and similar types of shots. Here we're going to talk about some a handful of photos, and these tend to be longer shots. So some are not HDR, some are just super long. So this shot specifically is a 2-minute exposure. And this was kind of a lackluster sunset, but you know, I was out there and you can't time them all, right? I shot towards the New Jersey side, walking along the west side highway park thingy. This was a pretty dark photo. So when we click to zoom in, we'll see some of this is out of focus due to just perspective. But here, even though we're at 100%, I think this is a bit, you know, not the sharpest. It's sharp, but it doesn't have all the detail that you would if something was properly exposed. So if we pull up the original, as you can see, pretty heavy in the shadows. So yeah, but also one thing that I like about the shot, this is a pretty heavy crop on the top and the bottom. I'm not using any specific aspect ratio. I just thought it would be cool to kind of do a narrow crop like this. This was shot at 20 millimeters. So if we do click over here, we'll see obviously this part, side of the image must have been, you know, further away or closer towards me. And of course the center, which I focused on this clock tower. You know, you have the edges that were, this is not all in a straight line. So The perspective I think is solid. Not hyper sharp edge to edge though, but I think it's due to the geography. So this shot, this is a 2-shot pano, and unfortunately it's a 2-shot HDR pano. Unfortunately, when I shot this, there clearly must have been it must have gotten darker by the time I shot this side, and we do have this ugly thing in the center. I feel like I know I could fix this, just would take some time. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you're doing a pano. Light changes pretty quick sometimes depending on the time of day. But in clicking in to kind of check out the details, shot open at 20, 5-stop Kolari filter, super sharp, edge to edge, at least on that side. You can see the Statue of Liberty here, although a bit far back, so not super sharp. This side, again, this is on more of a diagonal, so little soft over here, but sharp over here, and gets a little bit depth of fieldy. You can see some bokeh over there, but yeah, let's keep moving. This shot, different day, different location. This is shot in Williamsburg, and shot at 35. This lens was a little too wide for even at 35 for this specific scene. I think if we click in, maybe, shot at 50%. This is a nicer crop, but I did want to show the whole thing just for reference. There's plenty of times that this lens is just quite frankly too wide, but very sharp though. So at 100%, really nice. Pretty sharp edge to edge. 35. I then basically just turned and shot the opposite direction down the river. And again, this I shot wide open at 20. So we do have some heat distortion of some sort coming from this pipe. I believe it's steam, right? From the Domino Park. Here we saw these earlier when I shot towards the sky over there. Yeah, overall pretty sharp. This is this I was using a 10-stop here. I didn't have a 10-stop Kolari, so I was just using my B&W. This was pretty dark. So, and as you see, this is on a diagonal. So clearly the sharpness was really here. I believe I shot. I believe I set the building into focus. Now maybe I did set World Trade. But yeah, pretty nice image. This was a 2-minute shot wide open at 20. So this is a pretty sharp image. Remember these, like we discussed in a previous video, these bridges do move up and down, some level of sway. So if you do a super long exposure, you will get some out of focus. But overall, this is really sharp. This was shot with a 15-stop Kolari filter. And I've shot this a few times. I've shown this several times in different videos, and I just never had, I always did a bunch of panos. So this, finally doing one lens, I probably could even, I would probably crop in when I post this on like Instagram or something. Yeah, I would definitely gonna crop in a bit. That's probably the shot, but I just wanted to shoot this wide open since this is the perfect lens to shoot this spot. A variable zoom like this. And to be honest, I think 20 is really nice. This would be a cool print. This was shot on Pier 26. So I started out a bit further up and shot this scene, and then the goal was Pier 26. So I wanted to get here for sunset, but I did not estimate my time properly. This pier is extremely shaky. I'm not sure if I have any B-roll for this, but this, I was reviewing the shots in post, and I was really shocked that this was in focus, because the pier, anytime someone walked, the whole pier would shake. But this is a pretty nice example, shot at 28, so almost in the dead center. Some wonkiness going on with the HDR that I didn't fully resolve, but really nice example of this is HDR, but of a longer exposed shot, edge to edge sharpness. This is one of my favorite shots, 15-stop Kolari, shot during the sunset, And again, this was the prime example of the bridge. That the bridge is very shaky, but if we go towards the supporting structure, not too bad. And of course, all the buildings pretty sharp. You see all the people moving here, and I like how smooth the water is. But that's what you get with a 2-minute exposure. And the longer the exposure, the sharper everything gets. So all these buildings in the back are just hyper sharp. Shot at 27, so almost in the middle again, and really nice. This is definitely one of my favorite shots. The moon is added in post, and this was a 4-minute exposure. So just a long exposure, nothing, no HDR, and pretty much edge to edge sharp. Shot with a 5-stop, edge to edge sharpness. Shot wide open too. So, you know, the stereotype with wide lenses is that they are not super sharp, but here we are time and time again looking at examples where this lens at 20 millimeters is just hyper sharp. Again, in this segment, I haven't really done a ton of super long exposures. So I was kind of having some fun experimenting and whatnot. But yeah, this was a 480-second exposure, or 8 minutes. And yeah, this was tricky because the sun was pretty much set, but you know, it was still getting darker. And I used a 10-stop, and it was tricky because the light rapidly changes. So ultimately this was a bit underexposed. I really love how smooth the water is. It is a bit grainy. Like I said, it was underexposed. But like I said, the one thing I noticed, the longer you expose, the sharper everything gets. So as long as there's no wind or anything, you know, all the buildings in the back, this bridge, everything is just hyper sharp, and it's shot wide open at f4. So really neat. And again, this was just a long exposure. It's not an HDR. I think this is a pretty cool shot. This was another shot from the rooftop, Citizen M. And this was when the sunset was absolutely amazing. I'll throw in some B-roll here, but the sunset was just, it set, it was amazing, and then it just kept giving more and more. So this is a 50-second non-HDR exposure, shot wide open at 20, and I did a lot of correction on this image. And as you can see, you know, it's not perfect. You still have like distortion and whatnot, but I'm gonna open up the, let me open this up real quick. So yeah, I filled in a lot of this and I cropped a little bit too. But if we check this out, this was a guided correction. So if we turn it off, this is what we get. Not bad, but I wanted it to feel less of a push, because this obviously feels like it's pushed outward. So auto, not doing it. Vertical, not doing it. Full, not doing it. This is one of those images where you just got to eyeball it and choose the proper verticals and horizontals to get it lined up. But I think this was a pretty neat shot. And also, one thing I didn't touch upon yet, if you made it this far in the video, you get the hack. So if we take a look, this image is, I changed the distortion back to the 0. If we change it, move it up a bit, you get 160. I put it to 160. It looks like it's more corrected. It's more perfected. I could go back and take a look at a ton of these images we looked at, and I played with this a lot. I feel like it's a bit bubbled right here, but if I pull it out more, it feels like it's more corrected to me. This is something where it's kind of like, oh, I just push it all the way out, and like, does this look better? Oh no, it looks like you could see it bubbling a little bit in the center. If you pull it the other way, you could definitely see it, you know. But I felt like Lightroom did not do a good job with the presets to autocorrect. I don't know if it's Lightroom specifically. I'm sure Lightroom downloads this preset from Adobe, from Fuji, and then it, you know, adds its own formula or something. I don't know specifically how that works. But yeah, one thing definitely, if you get this lens, you definitely want to play around with the distortion. I also found that sometimes the images, when Lightroom enables when you enable the correction and whatnot, I found that sometimes you still have a vignette. And vignette's really hard. You gotta really make sure you're properly doing it. But I did find that if you really have an image you really want to get perfect, you may need to play around with these. And I feel like with most Fuji lenses, I rarely touch this. It's just with this ultra wide, when you're shooting at 20, ultra wide, or pretty wide. I wouldn't say it's ultra wide, but you definitely want to play with these a bit. This shot, however, shot at 35. Let me see what I did for correction here. So this, again, I did guided. Without the guide, it's much better, but I just wanted it to feel like it was more level, I guess, or less of a tilt. So, but again, not as extreme of a correction as the other one. And we do get these white triangles at the bottom. But if we take a look at the final result, I just basically crop in a bit. But this is the HDR shot. This is one of my favorite shots the whole shoot. I know I said that like 3 times, but this is probably my favorite shot. This moon's fake. I kept it true to what it was. Half crescent. So here's an example. 2 shots. This one shot at 35, and this is just a long exposure, nothing fancy. 8-second. No, this is HDR. I don't know why the file is not named that. This is definitely HDR. I know it is. This is HDR merge. But yeah, shot at 35. I did correct this. I'm not going to pull it up, but overall, pretty solid. Nothing too distorted. This was shot similar, same spot, or a little bit further down. Shot at 20, just meant to get an absolute extreme angle. So I wanted this whole vertical in the frame, but in doing that, you kind of sacrifice this end of the frame being, straight. But this is clearly meant to be just one of those extreme shots that is not properly, properly fixed and whatnot. It's just an extreme angle. This shot, however, is properly corrected. Again, this was a little tricky. I'm not going to pull up that we're going too far in time, but I'm not going to pull up the original. But this was a bit tricky to angle out just because these aren't like super straight up and down. Shot with the 15 stop, 2-minute exposure, and the whole thing is just hyper sharp. Shot more in the middle, 27.4, but as you can see, edge to edge, super sharp. Shot from the rooftop, Citizen M. This was just a pretty heavy crop. Not much to talk about here. This was obviously cropped to the center, so very minimal distortion, but shot pretty much wide open at 20. And then here you have this basically the crop was like this before. Yeah, here you have the whole shot. I did correct this a little bit, I believe. No, I didn't correct this. This was one of those shots where, now I remember, I tried to correct it. I spent some time, and it just is what it is. You're not really going to be able to hardcore correct this. There's just too much in the scene, and that's one thing that you get with this lens. Is that when you shoot wide open at 20, you basically are left with the option of potentially correcting, or you just got to go with what you shot. But as you can see, you definitely have a bunch of distortion here, but you also have a bunch of the city in the shot. So kind of is what it is. So just a few final thoughts here. In terms of sharpness, this lens is phenomenal. It is sharp at 20 millimeters, edge to edge, depending on the type of shot you take. And of course, edge to edge at 35 millimeters and everything in between. It's a hyper sharp lens. Definitely are not going to complain about sharpness on this lens. In terms of distortion, that we reviewed pretty much throughout the entirety of the video, so if you skip to the end, go back and check a few sections. This lens definitely does have some distortion. It is a pretty wide lens. It's not an ultra wide lens by any means, but like most wide lenses, you need to get your perspective right. If your perspective is completely off when you're taking the shot, guess what? You're going to pull it into Lightroom to capture one, whatever you use, and you're going to try to correct it, and it just simply is not going to work. Maybe if you just completely crop into the center, but when using this lens or any other pretty wide lens, make sure your perspective is point on. If you want it to be a well-rounded photo, not too dynamic, not too distorted, take the time to set up your shot properly. And in terms of distortion, make sure if you're editing in Lightroom, you check out the distortion panel. Once you enable the lens corrections, you will be able to change the distortion as well as the vignette. And like we reviewed, I noticed a few times that it makes sense to kind of just move it up a little bit, correct it a bit more than the auto corrections applied. I'm not sure why. Maybe Lightroom just doesn't handle this lens. Maybe there'll be an update in the future where it will handle the lens a bit better. I have not really fooled around too much with the distortion settings on other GFX lenses, so I'm not really sure what's going on, but that is an option if you are using Lightroom. In terms of flaring, like we discussed, this lens will flare, but it's honestly nothing too bad. Nothing was too glaring in my opinion, so I thought it handled flaring pretty elegantly. In terms of, is this lens for you? Really depends on your style of shooting. If you love shooting street photography wide, this lens is for you. I personally love doing wide street photography. As you saw, I'm either doing ultra wide street photography or more narrow, like with the 110 or something like 200 millimeters. So I personally love this lens. If you love doing wide street photography, don't even hesitate. This lens is for you. And the zoom gives you a bit of flexibility on, if you have to simply zoom in or zoom out, depending on your position. If you have the 23 millimeter lens, the GF23, I'm not sure if you need this lens. If you do pick it up, most likely will be some sort of sell your existing lens to buy this lens. If you really find that the 23 is not wide enough for you, then I would pick up this lens. You're really only gaining an extra 3 millimeters. It does make a difference, but I'm not sure if that could justify spending all that extra money or selling your existing lens and losing money on that. Personally, I would probably just stay with the 23, but in terms of sharpness, comparing the two, they're about the same. I don't think you could go wrong with either. I think the 23 is a little bit less distorted, but we'll get more into that in the 23 video. In terms of, will I be picking up this lens? Absolutely, no questions asked. I actually just finally picked up a bunch of lenses for the GFX. I picked up the 110 and the 50mm 3.5, which I'm recording this video on. Fujifilm just launched an epic Black Friday sale, so definitely take advantage of those sales. If you're waiting to pick up a lens, now is an awesome time to do it. I am recovering a little bit from doing that. I also picked up the 120, so I'm gonna let my wallet cool off a little bit, but I will absolutely be picking up this lens. It's a phenomenal lens. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Please consider subscribing if you have not to this channel. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Also, let me know what your thoughts are on this lens. Did you think it was super sharp? What did you think of the distortion? Am I being too generous? Was it super distorted? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But with that being said, stay tuned. I have a video on the 23, like I mentioned. Also, I'm gonna have some videos on the 45 versus the 50mm lens, as well as the 110. I'm gonna have a video coming out on that as well. And probably the 120. I'm gonna have a bunch of videos coming out. What are you waiting for? Subscribe if you haven't. And with that being said, I'll see you in the next video.